In a webinar, a slideshow appears. On the title slide, Youth at Risk of Homelessness, YARH, University of Maryland, Baltimore, Enhanced Youth Transition Program, February 8, 2021. In the top right corner of the screen, Jan Schaefer, a woman with short blonde hair, appears in a small chat window.
Can you hear me? No.
A menu bar briefly drops down from top center of the screen. Jan stands and steps out of view. Now, the chat window expands to a full-screen view. Jan returns to the computer and sits facing the camera. Jan puts on her eyeglasses and smiles. In another chat window, Burnett Jen Vindran sits facing her webcam.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. We're a couple minutes past 1, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to toss it over to Jan Schaefer. She's the director of Program Innovation at the Children's Bureau. Over to you.
Jan Schaefer.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm so pleased to be able to open this webinar series this afternoon Eastern Time and to welcome all of you who've joined us today. I am the director of the Division of Program Innovation in the Children's Bureau, and we're responsible for the discretionary grant activities in the Bureau. CB has a budget of approximately $10 billion, and most of that money is distributed to states through formula grants to help support their child welfare programs and their foster care programs. A small portion of the money is available to us to issue discretionary grants, which are awarded competitively using a peer review process to state, tribal, and local agencies, to faith and community-based organizations, and to other nonprofit and for-profit organizations. We consider discretionary grants to be sort of learning labs in the field. And often it's because of these innovations and because of the way work is improved through these discretionary grant programs that really allows us to make changes in the field of child welfare. YARH is a wonderful example of this. This discretionary grant program is entitled Youth at Risk of Homelessness. And we established it in 3 phases, understanding that youth who've been involved in the child welfare system face tremendous challenges as they transition to adulthood. We know also that building evidence in the field of child welfare, particularly around youth programs and difficult, challenging problems like youth homelessness, really takes time, which is why we established this discretionary grant program in 3 phases. Phase 1 focused on planning and research. Phase 2 focused on implementation and testing interventions, and Phase 3 focused on summative evaluations. It is the work from Phase 2 that we'll be sharing with you in this webinar series that starts today, and give grantees the opportunity to share the lessons learned. I want to especially thank Katherine Heath in the Children's Bureau for her leadership and her creativity in designing and implementing this entire grant program. So thank you. I will look forward to the presentation this afternoon and the presentations in the months to come. Thanks.
Jen.
Thank you, Jan. So now we're going to hear from Carrie from the University of Maryland.
Brown-haired Carrie Gold-Cabler's chat window appears to the right of the slideshow.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Jen, and thanks, Jan, for that background information. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Carrie Gold-Cabler, and I'm the Project Director for Thrive at 25 and Enhanced Youth Transition Planning. Presenting today with me is Sarah Bowman, our Transitional Planning Coach, and also joining us today is Dr. Elizabeth Greeno, our Lead Evaluator and Co-Principal Investigator, and Deborah Harburger, Co-Principal Investigator. The other members of our team are Kevin Strubler, Senior Research Analyst, and Liz Hoy, Program Specialist. Next slide.
On the next slide, today's agenda followed by a bulleted list.
So today we're going to talk very briefly about the history of YARH. Jan just did a beautiful job in summary, talking about what are the current YARH activities, and then we'll go into depth about what our actual model is.
Grantee presentation on enhanced youth transition planning, EYTP.
Leave plenty of time for questions. That's always our favorite part.
About YARH, youth and young adults with child welfare involvement face significant challenges in their transition to adulthood, which increases their risk of becoming homeless. To build the evidence based on what works to prevent homelessness for those who have been involved in a child welfare system, the Children's Bureau funded this multi-phase grant program.
The grant program in our related contracts is known as YARH. The University of Maryland, Baltimore, that's us, in partnership with the 5 local departments of social services on Maryland's Eastern Shore, was awarded a planning grant in 2013 as a part of the Phase 1 work, and then an implementation grant in 2015. So locally, our YARH program is known as Thrive at 25. Next slide.
Motivation for YARH.
Youth and young adults with child welfare experience are most at risk of homelessness. Approximately 20 to 23,000 youth age out of foster care every year. States have the option to extend the federal program to age 21, and Maryland is one of those states. But we know that there's a great disparity in the outcomes of youth exiting from foster care. We know that while some young people will transition out of foster care into adulthood successfully, some youth, particularly those who have experienced multiple placements, group homes, have run away from foster care, are at an additional risk of homelessness. The purpose of YARH has been to change the relationship of responsibility that child welfare agencies have when preventing homelessness. Our YARH grant gave us the opportunity to learn more about what transition age youth need to help them make this transition more smooth and design a model that meets those specific needs. So next slide. Thanks, Jen.
YARH goals.
So the specific goals of YARH were very clearly stated. We were to develop a comprehensive service model to prevent youth and young adult homelessness, and then test that comprehensive service model in order to build evidence to support young people.
Where is YARH? On a map of the U.S., several states are filled in with dark blue.
So on the map, you can see there were 18 communities that were awarded YARH Phase 1 grants. And out of those 18, 6 states were awarded a Phase 2 grant, and that includes Maryland, in addition to Colorado, New Jersey, California, New York, and Ohio.
Phase 1 grantees are located in 17 states across the nation. Phase 2 grantees are located in 6 states. Phase 2 of YARH will continue to provide support to organizations from Phase 2.
So building evidence takes time due to the lack of evidence-informed or evidence-based programs for youth aging out of foster care. Generally and specifically that focus on the outcome areas of interest. our team started this process below the bottom bar intervention description. So we were starting at base level to try to design an intervention that would best meet young people with foster care histories needs. From there, we began to design our comprehensive service model. Although this was not a cut and dry process, we went through a lot of back and forth in order to really figure out what would be the best intervention to meet our needs. This included adding, removing, or enhancing elements as we reviewed the data and received feedback from not only foster care leadership, supervisors, workers, and youth. And we continue to work toward evidence of effects and understand that this will take time. Next slide.
Progression of phases 1 to 3. YARH focuses on building grantee capacity to do the work.
As Jan so eloquently summarized, there were 3 phases to YARH, and the point that I really want to make specifically to our project is that during phase 1, we were really poised in a great position to be able to take this work on the Midshore because the 5 local departments of social services had already on their own prior to us in partnering with them to do this grant, had already gathered to try to address the needs of transition age youth on the Midshore. And so we were able to just join with them in the work that had already started, which just put us in a really unique position of partnering. Next slide.
How will we continue to learn? Watch for new YARH products.
So the Administration for Children and Families and Mathematica plan to continue to share findings and lessons learned from the YARH work. There's a list of products that are planned.
YARH2 Process Study Report, YARH2 Process Study Brief, lessons from the field about continuous quality improvement. Other products building from grantee experience will be useful to the field. New issue briefs, an episode of Mathematica's On the Evidence podcast, a blog post. On the next slide, implementation adjustments and adaptations.
Next slide. So as I said earlier, Thrive at 25 is our YARH project name. EYTP is the model we created to reduce the risk of homelessness among youth with foster care histories. Prior to the creation of EYTP, we had initially designed a transition planning meeting facilitator model. Sarah Bowman was our facilitator. The idea was that Sarah would facilitate meetings for youth who were in a high-risk group, as identified through the use of a risk screen that was created by Dr. Greeno. There were a couple of issues with this. The intervention hinged on Sarah. How did we know that this could be replicated? How many more Sarahs are there to be able to do this type of work? Was it sustainable? What about youth that fell into low or medium risk categories? And finally, wasn't transition planning about more than just a meeting? Through the review of literature and interviews with current and former youth in foster care in Maryland, we identified a clear theme. Youth who felt prepared and successful after leaving foster care had a commonality. They all had a positive, close, engaging relationship with their foster care workers. We needed to help child welfare build capacity in their workforce. This was what youth were asking for. It also became clear that all youth 14 to 21 needed to benefit from enhanced transition planning. From this, EYTP was developed. As we've already mentioned, implementation is messy, and there have been and continue to be bumps in the road. This is not unusual or unexpected. Implementation is not a linear process. However, it is crucial that we listen to and learn from what these bumps can tell us, such as the importance of communication with our partners. It has to be clear, transparent, frequent, and consistent. There are a lot of moving parts to embed a system-changing model into child welfare, and we must be responsive. Our child welfare partners must feel heard and know that their active engagement and support at each level of implementation is critical to EYTP's success. Next slide.
Adding the E to YTP.
So what is EYTP? It's about the whole transition planning process, not just a singular meeting or the youth transition plan itself. Foster care workers spend more time with youth in order to build strong relationships. In order to support the use of best practices and youth engagement, all foster care supervisors, workers, and facilitators are certified and trained in Achieve My Plan, otherwise known as AMP, a youth engagement overlay designed by youth, for youth, with youth in partnership with Portland State University. Supervisors are supported in building a strong workforce through an intentional skill-based behavior change coaching model. A lot more on that to come later. The EYTP process provides frequent and consistent opportunities for youth to develop and practice self-determination skills they'll need for life after foster care. EYTP is just as much about the journey as it is the destination. We've made significant revisions to the Youth Transition Plan itself to better serve the needs of youth and their teams. Next slide.
Going beyond federal and state standards.
So another important aspect is that EYTP goes above and beyond federal and state transition planning standards and mandates. In jurisdictions implementing this model, EYTP meetings take the place of Maryland transition family involvement meetings and occur every 2 to 3 months, opposed to once or twice a year, depending on the youth's age. In order to plan for these meetings, foster care workers are checking in and meeting with youth frequently. Also, transition planning begins in earnest at age 14. And there's been a lot of discussion about how can young people really engage in transition planning at such an early age. And so we work with workers in order to create plans that make sense for all ages of young people between 14 and 21. Youth and their foster care workers partner to build strong teams with natural supports who will continue to support the youth once they exit care. Next slide.
Rural context.
So a little bit about where we're doing this. So here's a map of Maryland, and the oval circled part is showing you the 5 counties that we're implementing EYTP in, and you can see the population density. It's much less populated than on the Eastern Shore, where there's more urban and suburban areas. So EYTP is being implemented in 5 counties, also known as the Midshore on Maryland's Eastern Shore. The Midshore was a good fit for the YARH grant for several reasons. As I previously mentioned, the Midshore Departments of Social Services had already started the work of enhancing services to transition-age youth prior to the YARH grant opportunity becoming available. And there was also a strong need to build evidence of youth transition planning interventions in rural areas, so this was a perfect fit. Also, workers on the Midshore have lower numbers of youth that they are working with at any one time, which made this a good testing site to implement an enhanced transition planning intervention. So for instance, right now across the 5 jurisdictions where we're implementing EYTP, there are 29 youth that are between the ages of 14 and 21 that are engaged in EYTP. This includes 5 young people who turned 21 during our state's moratorium on exits from foster care as a result of the pandemic. The moratorium in Maryland is set to continue through June of 2021. There are many challenges faced by foster care staff in rural areas, including lack of reliable transportation and limited youth-specific resources. However, there are a lot of positives, including a willingness to be flexible and creative, which has grown out of needing to really think differently about resources that are available in order to meet the needs of young people. Next slide.
Rural population and building evidence.
So foster care units in rural areas tend to be generalists. We don't have specific transition planning units in foster care because the caseload sizes are low. So you may have a foster care worker who's working with children birth to 21 years old, and they may be working with them simultaneously on their caseload. So that required having some more intentional training around youth engagement and working specifically with teenagers, because those foster care workers might not necessarily have any kind of specialization in that area. The biggest challenge to building evidence in a rural setting is that our numbers are so low, which means that we don't have the sufficient sample sizes to detect differences. In order to build evidence, we needed to institute a strong CQI process and use both quantitative and qualitative measures. Now I'll hand it over to Sarah, our transitional planning coach, to review the specifics of EYTP.
Red-haired Sarah Bowman.
Thank you, Carrie. If we move to this next slide, I'm going to be digging in a little bit more about what EYTP looks like now, and also be doing some reflection again on lessons learned and how we got to where we are. So you'll see here, these are our core principles.
Youth-driven, individualized, team-based process, committed and competent workforce, comprehensive, accountable.
And what we have found is that, you know, what every model has values or core principles, so to speak, but what we know is that if just focusing on those values doesn't always make the shift that's going to be effective, right? So we'll be talking about that a little bit more, but just to kind of define what we mean by each of these elements. First of all, youth driven. And this is the first one I wanted to share with you because it is likely the most important in all aspects of the EYTP model. So it's the purposeful language that we use that's grounded in youth culture. Also, it is some components that are specific processes that are designed to have the youth lead their transition planning process, meaning between the work that they do with the worker in between meetings to the way their transition plans are worded, and even leading their own meetings from time to time. Individualized, so every youth process and plan can and probably should be different. So that's another element that we really train and coach on to make sure that, I mean, we've all been guilty and seen those cookie cutter plans, right? Or the kind of those vague transition plans that they get a job. So really individualizing it to not just the youth's goals, but also the strategies and the resources that they are going to use to implement and monitor that plan. Team-based. So this is kind of a parallel process with implementation as well as the actual model with youth. So teaming happens between the youth and their worker and the rest of their supports within and between those meetings that Carrie was saying happen every 2 to 3 months or more frequently sometimes. It's a purposeful teaming and engaging process, not just with the folks who may be participating in the meeting, but particularly targeted as natural support and looking at supporting and participating in planning isn't just limited to if you're sitting at the table or in front of your monitor doing a virtual meeting with youth. And then also there's purposeful collaboration and teaming between the worker, the facilitator of the meeting, and the youth. Next, committed and competent workforce. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but coaching specifically targeted to the workforce and growing and developing those skills. Also, in alignment with Maryland's integrated practice model, so purposefully not making something extra or an addition to, but enhancing some of the principles that are already required of them and kind of merging them and making them real. And then comprehensive, meaning that the transition planning process is assessment informed. The plans are monitored for adjustment, looking at collaboration amongst the team members and kind of checking in, and also getting meaningful feedback from youth and team members after each meeting. And then also accountable. So that prep work that I was talking to you about, it's really intended to help identify those supports and the goals, driving their transition process. The YARH2 is adjusted and as progress is made, or maybe there's a barrier that's there. And then the plan also includes very specific accountability measures for the youth, but more importantly for the rest of the team. So everyone knows exactly what's expected, who's going to do what, so that everyone can be on the same page. So those are the core principles. But then as we dig in a little bit further, next slide, Jen.
Essential model components.
There are a couple essential model components. Now, I want to go over them in a couple different ways. And the way we look at it is that the two different perspectives are focused between the youth and the workforce. So we are going to start with looking at the youth level essential components. Jen, if you'll go to the next slide, please.
Youth level.
So these are the essential model components if we're looking at the youth level of the model.
Prioritizing
So
youth
really,
engagement, focused on
prioritizing
team-based support and planning. Transition planning meetings at
linking
least
up
every
and
3 months,
embedding
driven by
youth
youth.
engagement
More
within
frequent
every
check-ins
single
between worker and
aspect
youth.
of the process. So I know everyone's talking about engagement and the emphasis on it, and we really kind of wanted to take it to the next level and make sure that there were measures put in place, one, to really define what we meant by youth engagement, two, specific skills and strategies to help support the workforce in doing that, and then three, to build in a process so that we were, what's the saying, preaching what we, walking the walk, right? And talking the talk. So as Carrie mentioned earlier, she said that, you know, EYTP isn't just the plan. It's not just the meeting. It's not just checking the boxes and fulfilling mandates, but it's really focusing and prioritizing that relationship between the youth and their worker, which is the key to this intervention. There's other important pieces to it too, but that is really the fundamental piece. So workers are partnering with youth to build those strong teams to help them meet their goals. You know, the concept that teams may be fluid and change, particularly if we're looking at planning with a youth at 14 and older. And then again, the entire process is driven by the youth. So there's an express intention of giving them natural but important and individualized opportunities to grow skill. So, okay, the question is, what does EYTP look like?
The EYTP process flowchart. Specific sessions are structured to help the worker guide the youth in thinking about goals, preparing for meetings or events, taking action, and repeating or reviewing.
And it's purposely not cyclical because it doesn't always go in the same cycle. But this is the sequencing of the EYTP process. Carrie had mentioned AMP, or Achieve My Plan, which is the training and the curriculum and tools that the workers use to provide the structure to walk youth through this process. So the structure is really important and is part of fidelity. However, it's not rigid. So that gives some flexibility for the worker and youth to kind of do the things that kind of make sense at the time. But in a nutshell, there are a couple activities that are a part of the EYTP enhancement, and that is a vision to activity where the youth and the worker are specifically talking about strengths in a meaningful way. They're identifying big dreams and hopes, starting to kind of work through what it looks like and what it feels like to identify next steps and planning them out, and then how to check in with them. So that's kind of setting the foundation. The next piece is the preparing for a meeting, or you might hear P4M because we love acronyms. But the P4M happens before the youth's first meeting, and that's specifically targeted at the preparation and the youth informing what that meeting might look like. So talking about effective communication with their team and practicing it, setting the agenda, going over things that may not go exactly the way they want to, kind of anticipating the situation, just figuring out who really needs to be there to help me work on these goals right now. And then the meeting happens. Everybody loves the meeting. We really try to enforce and make meetings look really different than youth have experienced before. Keep them separate from maybe a process that they were a part of that sometimes was not supportive. And so being really flexible, adjusting agendas, making it fun as much as possible, again, individualized. And then next is the booster check-in. So that's kind of where the circle comes full around, and the worker and the youth check in several times in between meetings to go over pieces of the vision to activity. You're preparing for a meeting, checking in about how the meeting went. Would they like to do something different? And then the cycle kind of starts all over again. The key thing is it's not just preparing for those meetings, but what these sessions do is provide a context for youth to be able to identify and then practice self-determination skills that are embedded within this planning process.
EYTP overview video for youth.
And actually, we'll have a reference for you guys to use that has some of the AMP materials. Okay, Carrie.
Carrie Gold-Cabler.
Thanks, Sarah. So through youth focus groups, we learned that youth were getting inconsistent information about the EYTP model from workers. And I'm sure we can all, that resonates with all of us as we're individualizing our work and working with different people. Maybe you tell a different part of the story each time. So in order to start to help support workforce and providing all youth with consistent baseline orientation to what the EYTP model is going to involve, and also to provide a resource for youth to view the orientation on their own time, we created an EYTP orientation video, which we're going to share with you guys now. It's just a couple of minutes long, just to give you an idea of what every young person is learning about EYTP when they first come into the EYTP model. And workers are using this both with youth who are just turning 14, as well as for youth who've been engaged in EYTP just to, so that they can use it as a resource on their own. We also created tip sheets for workers to use with young people when they're sharing the video in order to maximize its effectiveness. And we also have a companion video for team members. So Jen, I will turn it over to you.
In a video, lines and dots form the abstract image of three figures in upward motion. Enhanced youth transition planning. Now, in a cartoon, a ponytailed teen watches a young girl play a video game. Next, a shaggy-haired teenage boy steps into view.
Hey, so if you're watching this, chances are you're between 14 and 21 years old and are involved with foster care in Dorchester, Caroline, Talbot, Queen Anne's, or Kent County. Why were you asked to watch this? Well, the cool thing is that the Mid-Shore counties are doing something new that's more focused on you to plan for your future and your transition out of foster care. It's a process called Enhanced Youth Transition Planning, or EYTP for short, and it's really important that you know about it. First thing you should know is that the EYTP process takes the place of Youth Transition Family Involvement Meetings, or FIMs. You may be asking, why is there a new transition planning process? What's going to be different from my transition FIMs? Am I going to have to work with new people? These are all awesome questions.
The boy and two girls appear in an office where a woman types.
Why is there a new transition planning process? Well, a new transition process was developed because youth like yourself were concerned about things like housing, maintaining contact with the people you find supportive like friends and family, and having the skills you need to be self-sufficient when you leave care. EYTP was specifically designed with these concerns in mind and was developed to make things better as you exit care. The EYTP process was created to help you develop a team of people who will support you, figure out what the things are you have going for you, sometimes called assets, and identify all of the stuff that can help you, we'll call these resources, and map out a plan for how to deal with the challenges you may face after leaving foster care.
A cartoon Sarah Bowman.
So what's going to be different from my transition FIMs? With EYTP, you'll have more frequent meetings with your worker. You'll work together with your worker to decide what you want to talk about during your EYTP meetings and who you want to be there. The other bonus is that since a lot of the planning is happening before the meeting, the actual meetings are not as long as old transition FIMs may have been and are more focused on the agenda that you created with your worker.
The three youths sit at a table with Sarah and eat pizza.
Am I going to have to work with new people? Maybe. That'll be up to you. Who you invite to your meetings may change from meeting to meeting. You will be choosing team members who are supportive to you and who can help you meet your goals. A member of your team could be an adult who has given you good advice, like a relative, foster parent or guardian, the parent of a friend or classmate, a coach or teacher, a member of your spiritual community, a neighbor or employer, a court-appointed special advocate, CASA, attorney, or someone with a career you're interested in. The list could go on, but you get my point. You'll also be choosing where you're most comfortable meeting, for example, a library, a restaurant, or the home of a friend or family member. Together, you and your foster care worker will be thinking about your goals, figuring out your support people, preparing for your EYTP meetings, putting together a transition plan, getting tasks done, looking at your progress and goals, and repeating or reviewing these steps.
Sarah and the kids exchange smiles.
It is totally normal to feel a little bit anxious during this process. If you do feel this way, your worker is a great person to talk to about this and ask questions. Over time, it'll get easier and you can design your meetings to best represent who you are and what you're comfortable with. The best part is, You get to work on what you want to work on, focus on what you are good at, and work with the people you choose. Remember, you're not alone in this process. Your entire team will be with you and working to help you meet your goals.
This presentation was funded through the Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, Grant 90CA1835. Now, active youth engagement with Carrie Gold-Cabler.
So as you can see, we are really emphasizing the point that that EYTP is youth engagement. It's embedded in everything we do, including in supervisor coaching and all conversations that happen at all levels of implementation. And I really just want to make sure that everybody understands the importance of that. Next slide, Jen.
The youth's experience.
So what has been the youth experience with EYTP? So through our formative evaluation, qualitative interviews with youth, we found that overall youth are supportive of the EYTP process. Specifically, youth commented that they liked meeting with their workers more frequently, especially when it was a more casual checking in and just talking with the youth and not to sign papers. Youth are more invested in working toward goals that they choose. And youth felt valued and heard when they were supported in setting their own agendas for meetings and creating invitation lists to who was going to attend those meetings. So now I'm going to hand it back to Sarah, who's going to discuss EYTP's essential components from a workforce's perspective.
Sarah Bowman, workforce level.
Okay, so earlier I remember we talked about those two perspectives and we talked about youth. And so now let's flip the script and go and talk a little bit about the workforce. So there are three big components that have been vital and continue to be vital with strengthening the workforce. That's coaching with supervisors, and that's distinct from coaching with the direct child welfare workers for sustainability. The Achieve My Plan training and certification we talked a little bit about, and then the specific activities and skills that are embedded with training and coaching to help develop that relationship between the worker and the youth. So this whole thing is about making it, EYTP, happen, and then to make sure that it's done really well. That's implementation, right? So what we know is that training combined with coaching creates the conditions for quality implementation. It doesn't happen fast, but it does, right? And so these are the pieces where that we are seeing youth, seeing workers shift.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Training Institute Striking Services.
Oh, that was exciting. And so fundamentally what youth should see is that their workers are being held accountable and ensuring that they are supporting the youth in driving their transition planning process. So again, remembering that this whole model is set up to develop stronger worker-youth relationships, that these three models or three components also help strengthen that with the specific skill set, with it being done through the supervisor, and then again, the curriculum with Achieve My Plan.
Three-pronged support.
So there are three, next slide, Jen. There are three main, there are the three-pronged supports for EYTP. One is our implementation team that meets monthly. Is led by one of our local department directors, Linda Webb. So supervisors, assistant directors, our internal team participate in that. We also hold quarterly technical assistance CQI calls that are grounded in data with the local departments. And then there's supervisor coaching. Yeah, I think that this person might have been modeled after me. I'm not really sure, but I'm kind of excited to be a cartoon. And so one of the things that I do as the coach and trainer is bi-monthly kind of learning collaboratives. We call them peer learning with all the facilitators, supervisors, and workers. Monthly, really focused coaching sessions with supervisors, and then group coaching sessions with all 5 supervisors. And so I would say the most critical, though, is this supervisor coaching. So some of the other components, Jen, if you'll go ahead and move that forward.
EYTP coaching
model. Coaching is talked about a lot in child welfare and probably a lot of other areas in our world right now. I just want to emphasize that the type of coaching that we are modeling and is part of this process is very specific skill-based. So it's looking at the operationalizing of those core values we talked about and making sure that workers are able to understand what needs to be done, how to do it, and why it's important to their work. And that's where supervisors really hone in on making sure that there is effective change in some of the work that they are doing to help reinforce that relationship building, and then also the planning that goes in place with the EYTP. Move us along a little bit. So the next, we talked about what the youth were saying from their experience. And Jen, if you'll take us to the next slide.
Child welfare workforce experience.
What we know is that implementation doesn't happen quickly. And when you first start, it doesn't always feel the best, right? And a lot of times it can be a little more stressful if you're the one needing to change. But what we know and what we have found is that while there is that period of kind of like feeling it out, adjusting, in the long run, workers are feeling better, more prepared, and rewarded actually in the end as they see youth make these really tangible steps towards meeting their goals.
Lessons learned. Adapting model to child welfare. We are the purveyor, installer, technical assistance provider, and the intervention. Need to return to implementation scene to ground the model throughout the process. Youth engagement must be embedded in practice. Ensure child welfare leadership and workforce are central in implementation adaptations. Carrie Gold Cabler.
It's critical that the AMP youth engagement training and EYTP orientations for workforce use child welfare language and really weave those traditional workforce activities seamlessly with EYTP activities. It was really important to acknowledge our unique role as the university in this process. We were developing the model in partnership with the local departments of social services while we were also implementing it, while we were also providing technical assistance, and Sarah, in her role as a transitional planning coach, is part of the intervention. It was as complicated as it sounds, and it really required a lot of constant fine-tuning as we moved through this. So it's really important to clarify roles and expectations early and often. I will say it again, the intervention is youth engagement. It's woven into every aspect of what we do, and just constantly talking about that has really been critical. Another important component is to make sure that the local child welfare leadership and workforce are involved in all conversations about adaptations and adjustments that need to be made. Implementation is indeed messy and adjustments will have to be made. But owning that as part of the process and owning the lessons learned and working together with a clear vision can really help make cleanup along the way much easier. Next slide, Jen.
Impacts of COVID-19.
So we can't do any presentations about anything these days without talking about the impacts of COVID-19. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to give a quick snapshot on how we were able to adjust EYTP implementation to be responsive to the unique challenges that COVID-19 presents. Our team works hard to find opportunity and challenges that we face, and this was no different. Despite this being a really difficult time, both professionally and personally for everybody, you know, us included, and the LDSS workforce, there were a few bright spots. Sarah had already started to do her monthly coaching with supervisors virtually. Supervisors were not only poised to move all coaching activities to virtual, but they were able to better support their workforce to making the switch to virtual because they had already experienced it. Another positive is that many youth found moving to virtual meetings a positive experience. For some, it was less stressful than meeting in person. For youth who did not feel comfortable with virtual meetings, the workforce continued to be creative, and at times were able to meet with the young person in person with the facilitator, obviously outside, masked, and social distanced, in order to help them join the meeting virtually and to support them in a more physical way. So this provided the youth with the support they needed while also meeting the needs of the team to meet virtually because the worker and facilitator were able to log on to the meeting virtually, make sure that all the team members could see and hear, and then they were also there to support the young person. Another positive experience is that our team is really experienced in providing a diverse set of technical assistance. We were able to quickly mobilize to support the local departments in problem-solving challenges they were experiencing related to a work-from-home pandemic work experience. In addition to the EYTP model support, we were also able to provide technology support, as well as link workers with resources available for use at both state and federal levels, and then provide individualized support to workforce as needed. Next slide.
Sustainability and integration.
So EYTP is now funded by the State of Maryland Department of Human Services. Once our YARH grant funding ended, they saw the value in continuing to support the intervention in the 5 counties in Maryland that it's currently being implemented in. We are closely linked with our state partners at the Department of Human Services, especially the older youth team, and we work closely with them to continue to align EYTP with statewide initiatives, which has been helpful to make this more streamlined for the workforce. State Child Welfare Training entity for the state of Maryland is housed in the University of Maryland Baltimore School of Social Work, and Sarah Bowman is one of the trainers. This supports the further alignment and integration of training for counties that are implementing EYTP. So we will continue to offer our high-quality CQI data collection as a mechanism to guide implementation as we move forward with implementing EYTP. And before we wrap up and move on to questions, I just wanted to take a moment to personally thank Serena Richard at the Department of Human Services Older Youth Team for her ongoing partnership and unwavering support for EYTP. It's because of this strong relationship that we've been welcomed into state-level work groups to share lessons learned and to have the things that have gone really well spread throughout the state. I also want to give a special thank you to Linda Webb, the director of Talbot County DSS, and the DSS, she's also the DSS lead for EYTP on the Midshore. Linda has been a steady, creative, guiding force throughout this process, and we are so fortunate to have her and her colleagues as partners on this project. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Liz Clary and Kay Bradley, who serve as our Mathematica liaisons to this process, and to Katherine Heath, who has provided us with this amazing opportunity and always pushes us to think broader, bigger, and better. Next slide.
Related publications.
So here's some related publications that you can have access to. And again, the PowerPoint and the recording will be made available to you so that you can access those resources. And we also will have another resource page that we'll be sending out. And if they've already said all this in the chat, I apologize. And so now, Jen, I think we can open to a couple of minutes of questions.
The YARH project page appears briefly. Now, Jen's chat window pops up beside a slide entitled Questions.
Great, thank you. Angie, do we have any questions already from the Q&A?
Jen's chat window closes as a navigation menu drops down at the top of the questions slide.
My apologies for the delay. I couldn't find the mute button. Most of the questions have been answered, or the remaining ones might not be specific to this conversation, except maybe this, do you expect, oh, it went away.
Sorry, that's probably
and Angie, while you're looking for the
short-haired Deborah Harberger.
We've been getting some great questions.
And hi, everybody. My name is Katherine Heath, and I work at the Children's Bureau. And as Jan described at the beginning of this webinar, these set of grants that we're doing this webinar series about is about a set of demonstration projects. So this project is only available in Maryland's Eastern Shore. So as Jan talked about in her opening remarks, the discretionary grants with the Children's Bureau, the federal agency that's responsible for administering foster care services, has a small pot of money that we're able to provide to communities to receive the money through a competitive award process. And then they're testing out or implementing a new way of doing things. So unfortunately, we see a lot of questions and things coming in the chat about, is it available in other states or in other counties? No, right now it's only available in the Eastern Shore of Maryland. In Maryland, the state has also continued to invest in the implementation of this grant. So I think that actually might be a great question for our panelists to talk about, is some of the work that you guys have been doing in order to sustain this intervention, or the work that you've done to be able to continue to do it after the discretionary grant funds end.
Carrie Gold-Cabler.
Yeah, so I think if I heard your question right, Katherine, so through this whole process, we've worked with the Department of Human Services in order to make sure that we were co-planning, concurrent planning with the state to figure out that we would be able to have this be a sustainable practice on the shore. Ideally, we would love to be able to expand it further, but that is contingent on funding at a state level, unfortunately. But we do have commitment that it's going to remain on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which is a huge positive. I don't know if I missed another part of the question.
Katherine Heath.
That was great. Thank you so much, Carrie.
Carrie.
Oh, and actually, I think I see a question in the chat from Lonnie, who's in our state, and we sit on the Emerging Adults Work Group with her, and it's around housing. So the EYTP intervention is not specifically designed to address housing, but through the Thrive at 25 process, we were partnered with Ruth White at the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare, and she was able to provide really high-level expertise and consultation to local departments of social services in order to help time and leverage funding that's available for young people in order to maximize the subsidy that they can receive either through FUP voucher or the Foster Youth to Independence program through HUD. So I don't have any specifics on housing because that's not what we're doing. We're talking about transition planning, and that seems to be more of a site-specific resource question. But Ruth White is definitely available for you, Lonnie, because you're in Maryland.
Jen.
Great, thank you. Angie, any more questions from the chat or the Q&A?
Angie.
Sure, yes. One is how many?
Yeah, we have a great question.
Katherine Heath.
So I'll take a, sorry, Angie.
No, go ahead.
How many, because I know this is a great question for Maryland, which is how many cases do the assigned workers carry in the Eastern Shore?
I can
that's
that if you like.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, Sarah.
Sarah
the
Bowman.
standard is typically around 10, but in most time, it's rarely that workers do have a caseload quite that high. If you remember back to the rural slides, then on the Eastern Shore in all 5 counties, the foster care workers are generalists. So they have a wide variety of not just older youth, but younger children as well. And so actually, they're a little bit high right now, but the average, I would say, is about 5 or 6. Again, currently, some of those caseloads in 1 or 2 counties have gone up, but yeah, it's typically no more than 10, but I will tell you at 10, workers are pretty out with that. Oh, I see. Tara adds a question about, I love these questions around language. And it's instead of using the word AWOL when youth leave where they're supposed to, what does Maryland say? I would say that sometimes that term is still used. Our advice is to kind of get away from that like negative connotation and to just kind of talk about it real behaviorally, like, you know, they left or whatever. So there's a couple different phrases. Absconding is one, but you know, that typically we see, but I don't see language specifics of that.
Deborah.
But I would say that Liz Manley and our team really talks about flipping the language to missing, because that certainly engages police differently. It engages it. It puts the burden not on the youth and makes it seem like punitive versus what you'd say if your own kid wasn't in the house, you would say they were missing. So certainly informally, at least, we like to start having those conversations.
Angie.
Another question that's come up is what type of outcome data do you have?
Carrie.
Oh, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I was about to just interject that the sort of short-term outcomes, and I'll let Dr. Greeno speak to this more specifically, but it is important to remember that this really is a long-term focused intervention. So with the idea that transition planning starts at 14 if a young person is in care at that time, and that it follows kind of a methodic, planful, thoughtful process in how do they plan for their future. And so the intention is that we would follow young people post-exit from foster care at several different intervals up to their 25th birthday in order to be able to determine more longitudinal outcomes. So that is a really important question. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to interject something more about that, but that is definitely our wish, is to be able to follow young people.
Bespectacled Elizabeth
The only
Greeno.
thing I would add, the only thing I would add is just because our numbers are small, we've tried to triangulate it. So we have the CQI data that Carrie and Sarah mentioned before. I do have pre-post and a third timeline data for our youth and our workforce, but we do a lot of qualitative with this project. So I've done a series of interviews and focus groups with both the youth and the workforce, and separating the workforce into supervisors and direct workers along the way. But this really, I say it's a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, we would really like to follow these kids, up to 4 or 5 years after they leave care.
Jen.
Great. We just have a couple of minutes left. So is there another question from the chat or the Q&A feature?
Yes.
Angie.
I think, and this is from Mark Malloy. What topics are raised by children who participate in this program, and what is the most important to them? Where do they have the most need for help or assistance?
Carrie Gold Capler.
Well, I'm gonna let Sarah answer that question, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I think one of the sort of resistances from the workforce around youth setting their own agendas for their meetings of what do they want to focus on was really the feeling that, well, youth were going to avoid the kind of biggest, most intense, most important, from their view, domains to focus on. And so, we had to really work on trusting the process, and what happened was the exact opposite, where youth would, identify what they wanted to work on, and they would bring up the goals for that particular domain, and that's all they would focus on in that meeting, is to not overwhelm the youth and or the team. And what would happen is that the youth would get on a roll talking about the items that they were really excited about, and then that would sort of spill over into the other domains. And so then they would choose to make a shift in the agenda and to also include those domains. So I think what workers found out really quickly is that they needed to start where the young person is truly, and that the rest will follow once they feel comfortable with the process. But as far as like specific domains, Sarah, do you want to share some of your experiences from observing meetings?
Sarah Bowman.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know if I've thought about commonalities. Driver's license tends to be a biggie, particularly in a rural area. And so we see that pretty frequently. And then a lot about employment. I think youth are kind of used to that being the thing that they're supposed to be planning for, and rightly so, but I think there's still a shift of what the right answer is. But I think there's a lot of individualization. And like Carrie explained, like I participated in a meeting and we planned the heck out of a young man getting a tattoo, which was a little bit for some folks, but it was the best opportunity. We incorporated, or he was able to incorporate, like health and well-being, budgeting, a connection with his biological family, because the tattoo represented a piece of, so it's not just looking in your traditional isolated way of transition planning, but looking at, okay, that's important to this youth, so how can we incorporate some of the more creative experiences?
Carrie Gold-Capler.
And I see there's another question in the chat about paying for college or education, further education opportunities. And it doesn't, however, during the planning, during the YARH grant period, we did have flex funds to be able to help support young people in addressing some of the costs that were not covered for education. But what we do help the workforce do is really think strategically about the opportunities that are available for young people with foster care histories in order to access higher education, and how do you leverage those funding opportunities in order to make those possibilities possible for young people. And I think that the rural question was answered in the chat. I can't really see it all, but.
Yes, we do have other questions, but we are, and just to let you know, if you didn't hear your answer addressed in the presentation, we are going to compile some things, the remaining questions, and be able to try to get those out to you in a FAQ document. But I want to make sure we're honoring everyone's time today. So I will hand it back over to Jen.
Jen.
Yes, thank you everyone. This has been a great discussion.
For Enhanced Youth Transition Planning, Deborah Harberger, dharberger@ssw.umaryland.edu, Carrie Gold-Capler, carrie.gold-capler@ssw.umaryland.edu, Sarah Bowman, sbowman@ssw.umaryland.edu, Elizabeth Greeno, eGreeno@ssw.umaryland.edu. For general YARH questions, Mary Mugenborg, mary.mugenborg@acf.hhs.gov, Katherine Heath, Katherine.Heath@acf.hhs.gov, Kay Bradley, cbradley@mathematica-mpr.com.